Hello everybody and welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast, and it's the start of pre-season training, and we've got a couple of likely lads looking like they're ready for not quite a Dyche Gaffer's day, but my colleague Joe Thomas and Gavin Buckland. How are you, both of you, Joe?
Yeah, not too bad, cheers Chris, not too bad.
Yeah, Gav?
Should have a podcast version of a Gaffer's Day. What would that be? Would that be like 5 pods in a day or something? Something like that?
Yeah,
you know?
Without a ball in sight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just before we move on to that, just want to cover something that happened over the weekend. One player who won't be back for first day of pre-season training, of course, is Jordan Pickford, who's continuing his exploits at the Euros. I did a piece over the weekend. He was the hero again for Everton in the penalty shootout. You know, he's now saved 4 for those for England. But yet still, you know, he gets questioned. I know it does come through, you know, with the territory being England's number 1. But Joe, if I come to you first, your thoughts on Jordan's display against the Swiss?
Well, yeah, I mean, he made a big difference again, didn't he? It's another penalty shootout win for this England side. It's another one that he's been crucial to. And when you think of how much work Gareth Southgate has done to banish the penalty shootout demons from this England camp, even the one that they lost against Italy in the final 4 years ago, or 3 years ago as it was because of COVID. I mean, he saved in that as well. It wasn't
twice.
It wasn't his fault that England didn't win that penalty shootout. He couldn't really have done any more. So, you know, I find it incredibly bemusing how much the reaction tends to be one of shock and surprise every time he does well for England. And the amount of people that come say, oh, he has had a good club season, but he doesn't let England down. And you know, keep thinking, obviously we have this argument 3 or 4 times every single season, don't we, when everyone reacts with surprise and amazement because he's done something amazing, and we're just like, yeah, you know what, no one's done more to keep Everton in the Premier League over the last few seasons than Jordan Pickford. You know, he's been phenomenal, and people should put some respect on his name.
Yeah, Gav, I imagine you weren't surprised by him saving the penalty then, and that's for like 4.
And let's face it, I don't think any person who's watched England over the last 3 or 4 years would be surprised either, would they? Because it's that like 4 out of 14 he's saved, and I think that
at least one in every shootout he's been involved in.
1, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. I think the record by England keepers before them is 2 out of 30 odd, isn't it, really? Which I know it's different. It's funny now, isn't it? Goalkeepers, that thing of his ball, when he's got all the players. I mean, there's so much more research into penalty takers now that wasn't available 30, 40 years ago.
Poor old Peter Shilton still wouldn't have got anywhere near those German penalties in Italian 90.
And so I wasn't surprised. There was an interesting piece that was Bonnie Ronay in the Guardian today about. And it made the valid point that the things that people get irritated by Pickford, the hyperactivity, the wearing his heart on the sleeve, the way he reacts to the crowd and interacts in the penalty shootout, that's hugely beneficial. Yeah. And you're saying that, you know, that's his world, isn't it? The penalty, you welcome into Jordan's world. If you're the opposition kicker, it's Jordan's world, isn't it? And saying about, like, you know, before, you know, Pickford before the first kick, it was the first kick, wasn't it, by Kanji? His antics, where it was something like 20 seconds before Pickford went near his goal. Yeah. Then he got warned by the referee. Then he stepped out of his area. Then he got told to go back and to the 6-yard box. Then he went over to the referee and slapped him on the arm, I think. And then only then was he ready. And all this time, Akanji's, you know, he would have played that thing in his head, wouldn't he? Of, I'm going to take the vision of, like, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to take this, I'm going to play it to whichever side. But that is just completely interrupted. That you know, that train of thought is interrupted, and as a kicker, you're then distracted by Pickford's what Pickford's doing, and I'm sure that contributes to his good record as well. That he is very much the master of the domain, isn't he? Yeah. In a penalty shootout as the goalkeeper, and in ways that other keepers aren't. He was saying that in subsequent kick, he was moving the ball on the spot. He was playing with, you know, before the opposition player took it. He was putting the ball on the spot and stuff, and that's psychology and stuff, but it's part of his personality that people actually think is unattractive. But I do get, like, in a penalty shootout, it's a huge asset to be able to get inside the opposition kicker's head, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Martinez was doing that in the World Cup final for Argentina, wasn't it? That's what he was completely like that, and I don't imagine he was getting the kind of scrutiny that Jordan gets. I just find it incredible, really. I mean, I've done quite a lot of pieces, like I say, about this, Joe. But in terms of people, just sort of the odd things that people pick out, and I know that Alan Shearer, one thing he kept on going on about the fact that Pickford was going along with his kicking. Now, it's not like you're criticising Jordan Pickford for getting to a shot or not. Surely a lot of this, especially with goal kicks, is going from the manager's instructions. So it just seems almost like anything to sort of pick the bones out of Lee Dixon over on ITV. He was going about, he didn't know David Seaman was there back in the day after time. He'd be very quiet. But again, it's just little nitpicking about aspects of Jordan's personality. It just seems bemusing to me.
Yeah. I completely agree. I don't think there's anything really more for us to say. Like, we know his value, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we can see what he does in between the sticks for Everton week in, week out, and okay, every now and then there's a bit of a lapse where you can get a little bit frustrated sometimes when with some of his, as you say, kind of hyperactivity. But he is an absolute asset to Everton, and he's an absolute asset to that England squad. He's a big part in the success that it's had in recent years, and there's no more effective indicator of that than the way in which he is seen off so many rivals to his throne, who quite often seem to have, at times, from when we're looking at it from an Everton perspective, it feels like the likes of Nick Pope and Aaron Ramsdale and a few others have had real momentum behind them from both the media and from opposition supporters.
Yeah.
But none of them have done anything to suggest that they come close to doing what Jordan Pickford can do.
Yeah. And just about labouring a point on this, Gav, but just as you've spoken about this before in terms of a lot of it seems to be Pickford's background and who he is. He just seems... I know it's different times now. Like I said, England's number one, you are always going to have a certain amount of scrutiny behind you. But I just don't remember... I mean, like we're talking joking about Peter Shilton. I don't remember ever him being under any scrutiny. David Seaman, again, the same levels that Jordan faces.
I think Seaman was at the end, wasn't he?
Yeah. When he was getting lobbed by...
and the game, was it Macedonia? He let one in from a corner, which Jordan very nearly did on... was
Shaqiri, wasn't it, at the near post?
So I think we can be too precious, I think, and that's understandable and a bit defensive about players, Everton players representing the country, because lots of England players have had stick, haven't they? Yeah. That's just a matter of fact, and do get stick, and I think, but at the same time, I do think, I think a lot of the stuff that around Pickford has been unjustified over the years, hasn't it? Really, I mean, there's been the odd blunder, but he has been. The last three or four tournaments, if you take them as a whole, with Harry Kane, he's been England's most effective performer, hasn't he, across those 3 or 4 tournaments? Yeah. And, more so even this year, he's been ahead of Kane, hasn't he, really? So you'd argue that he's been our biggest asset in tournament football over the last, 5 or 6 years. Yeah. At some of the stick, you've got to accept that. Peter Shilton got loads of stick. And I remember even the 70s, Peter Shilton got stick against Poland. So it always happens in a goalkeeper, you're there to be shot at, as they say, literally. And I think we just can be a little bit too precious sometimes. But I agree about the long kicking. That might not be anything to do with him.
Yeah,
he's just manager. Says the former Newcastle striker Alan Shearer about the former Sunderland goalkeeper Jordan.
Yeah, it's becoming a bit of an obsession, as is it would seem. What's on my butties? I don't know. I know you two have been in a couple of separate podcasts to me. Ian's smirking off screen here. I mean, it seems to be becoming a bit of a regular theme with our viewers. I couldn't tell them. I don't know. We have to wait and see on that one in terms of what lies ahead. I know I'm anticipating them a bit like Sean Dyche licking his lips ahead of this start of pre-season. So Joe is
like Sean Dyche licking his lips when there's a spare pie in the press room.
Well, quite, because,
he likes that as well, doesn't he, at the end of a game? Yeah,
we know that. He's not shy. Is he coming forward when it comes to a post-match pastry snack? But yeah, Joe, first day of pre-season, Finch Farm. I don't think I've done a piece on Gaffer's Day. I don't think he starts with that one. I won't say he eases them gently, but I think it's always a day of anticipation, isn't it? As we've seen already, a few of the big names heading back to Finch Farm this morning.
Yeah. So most of the group are there. Obviously, the players that have been on international duty will get an extended break, so they won't be there for the time being. That includes those that were representing their nations before the Euros kicked off. So obviously, Branthwaite isn't there. He was involved in England after the end of the season. Even though he didn't end up getting taken to the Euros, so he gets an extended break, as do a couple of others like Idrissa Gueye, and obviously Vitaly Mykolenko and Amadou Onana both went. They were both in the tournament, weren't they, as well? So and there's Pickford as well, who's still out there. So, but we've seen them go through the door. Seamus Coleman was the first one in today, club captain, leading by example. So that's positive signs. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's there, Decore, everyone that you'd expect, and including some of the new signings, of course. Timo Obenham and Iliman Ndiaye are both there. Jack Harrison as well. So some new faces and the return of some familiar ones as well. So a really interesting one. I think always feels like a bit of a big day. This, cause it feels like it's the start of the new season now. Doesn't it? So and it's a bit unusual, I think, really, this summer, because the summer's been so busy. Normally in our profession, throughout June, back end of May and then June, we're scrambling around a little bit, really, without really that much to go on. Just written a piece at the minute, this will go up at some point on Monday afternoon, which is just talk about all the different things that have happened since Michael Oliver blew the final whistle at the Emirates and that kind of flood of controversy. I mean, it was definitely a handball from Gabriel Jesus, wasn't it, Gav?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
but so much has happened since then. But it really does feel like now is the countdown to the final season at Goodison. So there'll be no Gaffer's Day today. It's all fitness test. The first thing they had was blood test before breakfast, and then it goes into more kind of health and general medical assessments, just to see get the baseline measurements and figures for where the players are after the summer holidays that they've had, and then work to build them up from there.
Yeah, well, it's a big thing, isn't it, Gav, getting a good pre-season behind you. I know obviously that the stock that Dyche takes in the players' fitness, and it'd be interesting, the likes of Jack Harrison and stuff, who've been able to be able to get them back in relatively early. He only arrived in August last year and then didn't play until the end of September. It'd be beneficial for them, and the new signings Joe's mentioned, sort of being part of the group from the start. Yeah,
and it goes back to what we said about the signings and getting players back who were on loan and stuff and extending contracts. It's the continuity, isn't it, really? And I wouldn't expect, I might be wrong here, I wouldn't expect Dyche to do anything different in pre-season. Everybody he did last season, and was the season before then? I think he was there then, wasn't he?
No, it was last year, wasn't it?
I don't expect him to do anything different. I think Joe's right. It does feel like the start of the season. I was thinking. I said to you on the way up here, didn't I? I thought last week was probably the quietest week at Everton for about 3 years. To be honest with you, it felt
still
very,
signed a player though.
But it showed them a lot of the stuff. That would be a big news. But in relative terms, there's nothing else going on about ownership, PSR, all that type of the bingo card was not there, and so it was good to have a quieter week. But it does seem like the start of a new season, definitely. I think the important thing is, if you bring a few in, and you are right by getting them in early, we've got a chance to integrate them into the team, and not just from a playing perspective, from a social side and an organisation side as well, and that's vitally important, because a young lad going to people move around, but it's always a big thing. Everton's a big club, as we say. It's always a it could be a bit of a challenge, and I think that'll be important as part of pre-season as well.
Yeah, just going through a couple of the comments here. Dave Mack says Picks doesn't get the credit he deserves because he doesn't play for one of the Sky Six. Well, another one. AC, good day, fellas. I'm not sure if he's sort of coming from down under. I'm not sure. He also mentions what's for lunch, Chris. But he says a lot of interest in young Philogene. But in all honesty, then he goes on about asking me what's for lunch. But yeah, if I turn to that, Joe, I believe it seems to be an understanding that a winger could be next on the horizon for Everton in terms of squad recruitment. Philogene is not my lover, but could he be the one for Everton? We've lost Joe now.
Chris, or is that like?
If anybody wants any context, it's 7 minutes to 12, and 12 o'clock by gospel is when Chris normally has the aforementioned butties, and I think we're seeing the impact of him knowing he's after going to extend his breakfast for another half an hour or so. Well, Philogene is of interest. He's one of a couple. I think they've done some good work already, Everton, in terms of bringing players through the door. A winger is something that is definitely one of the priorities now for the fourth summer signing as it goes. There's a few areas of the team they'd like to look at. Out wide is one of them. Obviously, Lewis Dobbin left. Arnaud Danjuma has gone back to Villarreal. Jack Harrison has come back in through the door, but they only really have two genuine wide options at the moment. That is Dwight McNeil and Jack Harrison. Obviously, we know that James Garner's played out wide on the right in the past, but I don't think anybody really wants to see him out there again. We want him using his natural talents in the middle of the midfield, really. So it's trying to find ways of giving Sean Dyche a bit more of an opportunity to try something different out wide, even if it's just from I know he doesn't use his substitutes a lot, but I think it was very clear for a lot of last season, particularly once it was clear that Arnaud Danjuma wasn't particularly fancied by Sean Dyche. It felt obvious that Everton didn't really have anything on the bench, even if it's someone's a bit raw, someone with a bit of pace, or a bit of flamboyance that can come on and just maybe give the team a little bit more of an impetus in the last 10-15 minutes of a game when others are flagging. So that's key, and that's why we've seen interest in Yankuba Minter, who was at Newcastle. Obviously, deal got agreed with Brighton for him. That was only, given how much Newcastle valued him at, that was a deal that could only ever work in relation to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, even if part of separate deals effectively going the other way to smooth the negotiations. That didn't happen. Philogene is another one, but Philogene is also a player that a lot of other teams are after as well. Ipswich have bid for Jacob Greaves, and they're after Philogene as well. So we're just waiting to see really just how interested Everton are, whether he'll be one of a couple that's on their list. Spreer at Watford's another player that they've liked for some time. I think with Philogene, it does seem clear that he's available for a reasonable price. Holland has been quite clear that he wouldn't stand in the way of his young stars going to Premier League football if that's what they wanted. And it doesn't look like you'd end up in the Minter ballpark, which was Newcastle trying to get £30-odd million plus for him. It might even be half that for Philogene. So, there's an opportunity there. I think it probably just depends how hard Everton go for it. Probably depends on what they see as their priorities right now. And whilst a winger and adding a winger as early as possible would be a good thing, I think they'll also have one eye on outgoings and basically bracing themselves to see what happens with the interest that we know is there in Branthwaite, Onana and Calvert-Lewin. And I think actually the number one priority for me right now isn't income, and it's resolving the future of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. We know how integral he is to Everton. We know how important he is to the only way that Dyche can set up this Everton team at the moment due to his limited squad. So working out, obviously there's fresh terms on the table for him, not signed yet, but he's been back there today, and I'm sure at some point there'll be a conversation just going on along the lines of what his plans are, because there's a big difference between the amount of work that Everton will need to do for next season, depending on whether or not he's going to stay, and also have a massive implication financially, with him being available on a free next year if he does stay but doesn't sign a new contract. So there's all sorts of different factors at play there, but for me that has to be the number one priority. And my only hope of something that might change on that at the minute would be if he could be potential. Obviously, he comes in and Ilman dies there through the door. He's got the opportunity there to play in front of a genuine support strike there, rather than say Abdoulaye Doucouré. He's done a fine job under Sean Dyche. Obviously, been pivotal to Everton staying in the Premier League the last 2 seasons. He's very much a central midfielder that's been playing out of position, but he has been exploited because of his physicality, because of his energy, his enthusiasm, his fitness levels, almost doing a job and a half. If Calvert-Lewin knows that he's got a genuine support striker who's a bit more astute, a bit more savvy, a bit more skillful, it could be perhaps laying off chances to him that aren't coming from balls being pelted to him from 40 yards from the deep, and he's got to fight 2 6'5" defenders for him. Maybe staying might be a bit more of an attractive proposition. But that's the key for me.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just being bombarded now. It's my own fault by Michael Jackson jokes by the viewers. They're all in good taste, to be fair. They said, Chris, that Philogene joke was bad and you should beat it unless you want to be starting something. So there you go. Crowbarred them all in there. We're getting plenty of banter from the viewers, actually. Someone's put David Murphy. Brilliant content, fellas. So he gives with one hand. I love this podcast. And then he says, we need 2 pacey wingers. Tell Gav to get his knitting needles out. There you go.
All right. Okay.
Okay. So I'll stick to we'll stick to the wingers then, Gav. Yeah. Would you see that? Would you see that as a priority now? Getting in another wide man.
Thinking about like Joe saying about Calvert-Lewin. Calvert-Lewin, you'd want wingers, wouldn't you? People that can get to the byline and get balls across. Perhaps. I mean, McNeil and Harrison, and the way Dice wants them set up, will play a little bit deeper. So you're not going to get the sort of stuff that Calvert-Lewin's not going to get that delivery that maybe had under Carlo for the season. So that would be maybe another attraction. But yeah, I think the other thing about it I'd commented say is it's interesting to see the market that we're targeting at this moment in time, isn't it? Is players who flourished in the Championship and have attracted the attention of Premier League clubs, and that it's a market that Dice knows very well, doesn't it? Obviously. Yeah. And as Mr. Moyes showed us, that there is worse markets in the world than going to the Championship.
Young, hungry players, I like it.
The best, the best ranked players from that division, and I think age-wise as well. So you said on the last time on the pod that you can see a little bit of a strategy that's developing here, by Thirlwell and Dyche. That's the complete polar opposite of the one employed by Mashiri, Patel, at the end of the 2010s, which we're still, but hopefully just finally coming out of now. This is a completely different strategy that appears to be, on face value, something that, that's got more chances of working without necessarily undermining the financial performance of the club, and I'm all for it. To be honest with you, the only caveat I'd say there, Chris, and I've said this before on the pod, is on the one hand we're giving 38-year-olds and whatever another year on the contract.
39 now.
And at the same time we're buying players in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And I've this thing, isn't it? I think, and I definitely believe it is having players at an age range where that the two ends of the spectrum, having a large amount of players is not necessarily from a squad building perspective the best thing, in terms of building the squad and building camaraderie between the players. You've got players from a completely different background, different ages, and it's far easier to get people at the same age group, to mesh. And the one thing we haven't got, I think, is, and it's not necessarily something that's going to damage us, is we haven't got a lot of players in that, that sweet spot, I'd call it, for 24 to 29, where you're at your peak. Yeah. And we've got a lot of players either side of that. And, so it's not, as I say, it's not something that, is terminal in some terms of our chances. But history shows when you get that, Martinez had that, certainly. But 2014 onwards, that needs careful management. You always hear this thing, don't you? Of senior players will teach the younger players how to give them advice and support. If you ever listen to Jamie Carragher talking about this, says once you get over 30, you're only interested in yourself, your own fitness, your own form. Keeping yourself, physically at the top of your game. Those are your priorities because you're past your peak years. Yeah. And so I think that's something that will be need careful management, where we've got a squad with quite a few players that, at the end of either end of the spectrum age-wise, from early 20s to late 30s. Yeah. And that'll be interesting to see. Yeah, well, the classic one wasn't it? Is obviously Everton's best ever side. I think obviously the likes of Andy Gray and stuff were a bit older, and possibly Peter Reid, but most of them, like you say, were in that sort of mid-20s peak to powers bracket. Yeah, the peak years of players then were a lot earlier, probably 4 years before the peak years of players now, because players are naturally. You see the age range, the average age of Premier League squads now, it's 28. 29, for obvious reasons, because players want to stay fit longer, because actually they earn more money. They can extend their wealth, can't they, that they get from the game, and also the fitness comes into it. Where at that time the age range, average age would be about 24, 25, and we haven't. So ideally, what you want is your core of your squad to be in that that sweet spot, that 24 to 29 years, and we haven't. We've got players either side of that, which can be managed. As I say, it's not not going to terribly damage us, but it's a different challenge in terms of building the squad compared to where you've got a lot of players at their physical peak.
Yeah. It's hard enough having the age gap with just Joe and I going around the country, but there you go. We manage. Yeah, but just going back to that thing about the wide players, though, Joe, because we've had a few comments about this. I mean, somebody was joking last week with it, saying that Kevin Fell was trying to sneak in a lot of flair players while Dyche was down at Glastonbury, like he would come back to them all. But somebody's put, if Dyche didn't fancy Danjuma as he was all attack, will he be a fan of Philogene?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I think it probably comes back to there's an interesting conversation probably about the dynamic between Falwell and Dyche, and almost the contrasting roles that they have, in the sense of Falwell's main job, or the job that you want Falwell to be doing right now really is crafting a squad that makes sense and is sustainable for a long-term future. You want him building or putting in place the building blocks for a squad that can keep Everton up this season.
Yeah.
And then hopefully take them into the into the new stadium, in a position where it doesn't need too much to turn them into a genuine top half side. But you have to contrast that with Sean Dyche's job, and his priority is results now. And that won't change this season. So and for that, it's clear that he likes to rely on the people that he trusts most. And I think we've seen already from the last 18 months that he would rather play someone for 95 minutes if they're knackered for the last 15 minutes and take a gamble on someone that he doesn't fancy 15 minutes to go. Like we saw that with how McNeil and Harrison were used ahead of the likes of Danjuma and even Dobbin to a certain extent last season. So it's those two contrasting and competing dynamics are probably what's at the heart of it here. I think we know that the job that Falwell wants to be doing is he wants to be he wants to be identifying those young talents who have got enough experience behind them in senior football to suggest that they could make it at Everton and that they're not pure gambles. But he wants to be getting them before they've reached their ceiling. So Amadou Onana is the perfect example. Obviously, he was more expensive than any other signing that Falwell's pulled off.
Yeah.
But the strategy was there. You pick up a player before they have done enough to warrant the likes of the Sky Six or your European giants like your Bayerns and your Barcelonas and your Real Madrids coming in for them. So that you can get them a little bit cheap and you can be the one that take them there, and then you benefit from them going from a good player to a great player whilst they're with you, and then you benefit a second time when, if it happens to be that you're in a position where you decide that selling them's preferable, you get good money for them and you can then strengthen the squad even more off the back of that, which is something that we may well see happen with Onana this season. So, and I think that's where you're looking at the no one's waved the magic wand. Everton are still a club that are stretched financially. And I think that I think when we look at the business that they do this summer, if more incomings come in before the outgoings, I think we have to work on the basis that over this 12-month period, the more money they spend, the more money they expect to bring in from sales at some point. Yeah. Now, the beauty of where they got to with the Dobbin and Godfrey sales ahead of the last PSR deadline meant that they operate from a bit more position strength now, and they've got the opportunity to now maybe try and be a bit savvy and keep hold of players until the early part of the next summer transfer window next year. So with someone like Branthwaite, if they feel like they need a sale of that size to be compliant again, and it will be tough again this year, they at least now have the option of saying, well, if the right bid doesn't come in this summer, play him for a year, get all the benefit of that, keep the squad nice and strong, and then maybe sell them in the first few weeks of the transfer window before the PSR deadline next summer and still get that big hit, so you get the best of both worlds. But it really is interesting to kind of see how it's going to operate. Because I think that Dyche is adamant that if he's given the opportunity, he would be more experimental. He would be like to develop and adapt his playing style. his point is that he's never had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Never had the squads with the talent to be able to do so. And quite often alongside that, he's always been in a situation where his Premier League clubs have been about survival and nothing else, which doesn't really give you the opportunity to experiment, to bring young players through and to take gambles on players, to give them minutes and see if they all of a sudden become a breakout star.
Yeah.
Whereas Valworth's job is almost to try and create as much potential for that as possible. So we'll see. A lot of this season will depend on how Everton start this campaign, I think.
Yeah.
If Everton can start the campaign as they did, as they spent much... if you say much, obviously we had that 4-month run without a win and we had the difficult start, very early start to the season, didn't they? But I mean, if they can pick up, and they have the fixtures to be able to do this, if they can start well, then it will just reduce so much pressure and it will allow the opportunity for more expansion. But I think there has to be a recognition that he can't just fill a squad with 20 trudgers that he trusts to do like the basic jobs well and nothing else. There has to be a bit more about them, because otherwise you end up in a situation where you're not just reliant on everyone performing to their best and you're reliant on other teams struggling a little bit as well. And there has to be contingency plans. There has to be plan Bs. There has to be the opportunity to mix things up a little bit if you're struggling. They didn't have that last season, and I think that was a big part of why. There were many factors why they went 4 months without a win in the league, but I think one of them was the fact that they just didn't have the options to change their approach in the squad. A big sign of progress this summer would be to end up in a situation where, come August, if Plan A isn't working with 75 minutes, there is actually a viable Plan B. And bringing in the likes of someone like a Philogene or something like that would aid that, as does Simon Villeman and Dye. But obviously we've got to set that against who ends up leaving, because again, if you take Dominic Calvert-Lewin out of that squad, all of a sudden you're back to the drawing board about where you're going to be with how you set up and what you do. So
I mean, Joe speaks about being in potentially a stronger position now with Jared Branthwaite, Gav. I mean, it's something we've discussed over the weekend. Did my Royal Blue column on that. Lisa Billington says, so we still keeping Branthwaite? I hope so, made up with the new signings. And then Keith Winers, the former Everton chief exec, he's spoken about that as well. He thinks they're in a stronger position. Certainly, in terms of, nobody's saying that Everton are immune to Jared Branthwaite being sold, but they certainly seem to be in a different position than they were before June became July.
Well, there's a number of reasons in that, isn't it? We probably... I was going to say got rid. That's probably not the right phrase to use. We release people for decent fees that perhaps you weren't expecting to release. Namely Dobbin and Godfrey. That'd be the first thing. The second thing is, well, we've not had a meaningful conversation about transfer fees with Manchester United, and I think the third thing, which is helping us, and as pointed towards this early activity in the transfer market, is the potential new owners have obviously given, we'll say, cash injection if people are to believe, both in terms of a loan to pay off the MSP deal, and also working capital. So one of the fears we had, didn't we, a month or two back, is we'd have to sell players not just for PSR reasons but for cash reasons. And I think that latter reason for selling players has probably disappeared for the moment, and I think that's also helped us with Branthwaite, and has also helped us maybe getting a few players in early. So I think Branthwaite is just wait and see what happens. I mean, there is an issue if Manchester United walk away. You're relying on somebody else to come in. Don't sell them here. I'm just thinking about the future scenario. And we said before that you need the best case scenario for Everton is 2 or 3 teams are interested, because that will raise the price. But I think keeping Branthwaite at the moment it seems to be the way forward. We may not need to sell him at all. Well, in this season maybe. We'll just have to wait and see. But we're certainly in a more stable position with them than what we were 4 weeks ago, when there was reports about green personal terms and so on. For many different reasons. I do think I do think the cash situation appears to be far better now than what it was, and I think that's helped us enormously in our transfer activities.
Yeah, Joe, you've mentioned him already. I mean, he was always seemingly the most palatable big sale for Everton this summer. But Dave Mack has said, any news on Onana leaving, lads? Fortunately, he had a poor Euros. Is it all smoke, no fire?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are probably people that dispute that characterisation of his Euros. I mean, he actually made the Keeps team of the group stages.
Yeah, right.
So there is a substantial body of the European football commentariats that think that actually he played very, very well at the Euros.
Okay.
Well, Dave Mack doesn't, but they game of opinions.
He's a player that divides opinions.
Yeah.
We know that, and different people want different things from their players. So there's no problem with people having alternative viewpoints. But I actually think that he probably strengthened his case for what he would see to be a step up over the course of this summer. And I think it's going to be a really interesting one, actually, because Everton Everton were willing to take seriously conversations over Onana that started at £50 million plus. Now that was a position that was the case before the PSR deadline and before the sales of Dobbin and Godfrey. And as Gav's just spoken about, some of those pressures aren't there now. So it may well be that they could try and push for a higher price. But he's a player that there is a bit of demand around. I think Everton can get a commanding fee from him, and we have to maintain the understanding and the acceptance that Everton do need to still sell over the course of this 12-month period anyway. I think that a lot of problems can be... I think Everton go a long way to solving a lot of problems for as minimal impact as you could hope for by Onana being the one to go. Yeah. And I think he's clearly open to a move, and whilst nobody is in any doubt of his ability at Everton, I think it's clear that, well, you look back at that massive week in April where Everton played Forest, Liverpool and Brentford. He didn't start any of those games. He was available for all three. So, I don't think it's too controversial to say that he's somebody that's still fighting to get into Sean Dyche's, first 11, as opposed to Calvert-Lewin or Branthwaite or Pickford, the other players who you'd say are worth a lot of money. And then which there could be interest in over the course of the summer. So I think Onana probably I think there's a deal there for somewhere that suits everybody. Probably suits Everton, suits Onana, and probably sees that a buying club get a very good player for a little bit less than what they might have thought that they would have to pay. Yeah. But what we're seeing at the moment is the opening salvos and a lot of transfer windows, aren't we? And Manchester United and Bayern Munich are both players that have been interested in Amadou Onana, and they're both doing a lot of business at the moment. So a lot of people's transfer interests are fluid. Yeah. And I think it may well be that we have to wait and see how the dominoes fall and stuff like that before we see further interest in him or the interest develop into something concrete. Because again, two of the other clubs that like him or have liked him in the past are Newcastle and Arsenal, and they are being a little bit quieter at the moment in their transfer business. Obviously, Newcastle are very busy in terms of outgoings, but again, it feels like, especially with we're now in the tail end of the Euros and also with Copa America as well, feels like there's a few clubs that haven't yet started to make their moves in the transfer window. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do. And I think Onana probably. Almost the way I look at Onana, speaking to the people that I speak to, is it feels like Onana might be number 2 or number 3 on a lot of clubs' lists.
Right, okay.
So, he might not be their first choice. Yeah. Obviously, Bayern, like Paulina, and I think they've agreed a deal with him with Fulham for him now, whereas for most of the summer it's looked like that might be in doubt. Well, that might then scupper their move, any move for Onana if they've got him. Arsenal like Bruno Guimaraes a lot. Well, would Newcastle sell him? Because if Newcastle sell him, then Onana might be someone that they like to get into. If they don't sell, then Arsenal might go, Onana might be a plan B. So it's waiting to see how all the dominoes fall to then see out. And I think that's where I think that's where Everton are with, say, Onana at the minute. As opposed to with Branthwaite, where it feels like Everton have kind of put their foot down and said, like, you treat us seriously on this. So I think it's more work for someone to do to get to Branthwaite, whereas I think the club would listen to inquiries over Onana and then go from there. But I guess despite how busy it's already been, we are still very early in the transfer market. And we have 2 major competitions that are still ongoing that will be colouring how people are approaching them. So, there's a long way to go.
Yeah, we've got the full gambit on Onana here. JG says Onana had a couple of okay games. That's about it. But David Murphy says Onana was on a different level in the Euros. Strong, progressive player who has a great ability to tackle and ability to find a teammate with progressive passes. Onana is an asset. I mean, what's your take on Onana, Gav? I mean, I think maybe a year or so ago, you and I were talking about him, saying, he could be a potential future Everton captain. He's certainly got those qualities, but I'm not sure if that one's going to be happening now.
Dice might dispute that actually at the moment, to be fair. Yeah, I think you get the impression that if he went, and that Dice wouldn't be too unhappy, would he, for a number of reasons. And I think he's made it quite clear, Onana, either officially or unofficially, that he would be happy to go. And I would see him. I agree with the sentiment that he's. If you could have a top priority player to go, you would say that he'd be the one where it would be best for both parties, where it would be a win-win. He'll get a big move that he craves to somebody with, in the short term's, got more chances of perhaps silverware playing in Europe than us, and also we will get a fee that will help us maybe reinvest in the squad elsewhere. So I'm with Joe on this. I think that's the general sentiment, really, around Onana. You come back to like that he got his shop at Newcastle, and is subsequently being left out of the squad, and we looked a far more settled unit, didn't we, in the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season with them not playing. Not saying his personality, I'm just saying about like. We looked a bit better balanced, surprisingly, for me, because I always thought he was part of our better balanced midfield, but we looked better balanced and a little bit more fluid with him not playing, and I wouldn't be too upset to see him go for a number of reasons.
Well, a few of you has been going on about Beto, and I think a few of those would be quite keen to offload him. I mean, FC has said Beto to Roma, Abraham to Everton. Well, there you go, see if that one happens. But she's also said, quickly, Joe, we're talking about a game of opinions, but when it comes to DCL, it's not one I necessarily agree with her on. She says, needs to give Dom a deadline to sign or get rid.
No, I think that's relatively fair, to be honest. I think Everton need to work out what their priority is. They need to work out what's the worst case scenario. Him playing for a season and going for free, or them selling him now but then having to replace him for a big historic season at Goodison Park. That isn't an easy conundrum. Like, I don't know what the right answer is there. And a lot of it probably would depend on how much you could end up selling him for, which would depend on the interest that's there for him, but also pivotal to that is at what point do you sell him? And there's interesting kind of pretext for this because when Everton sold Anthony Gordon in January of 2023, one of Kevin Farwell's big takeaways from that was that he believed that if he was to end up in a similar situation in the future, his takeaway, his lesson, was that he would give a deadline for anything to be done by and say, right, if it's not, all right, player, bidding club, if you're up for it, fair enough, we can go ahead with this. But if you haven't got it over the line by this point, it's not happening. We're pulling the plug because we have our own interests to protect. And we've got a plan for it. His position after that sale of Gordon was that he believed there was money to then spend on the striker. Obviously, remember that was the January transfer window when nobody came in, when it was quite clear that Everton needed assets and instead ended up selling one of their better players. But his position was always that he believed he had money after that point. He just didn't have the time to spend it wisely. I have a few issues with that. One, I think retrospectively, we now knowing where the club's PSR situation was, we know that he didn't have the money to spend. And two, perhaps it shows just how much of a mess things were at the club at that point, with how many different competing versions of where the club was at that time, because there were a lot of people there, Lampard included, I remember speaking to him about that, who, Everton entered that season knowing that there was a chance that Dominic Calvert-Lewin would suffer injury, misfortune because of what happened in the previous seasons, and knowing that whilst they brought Neil Maupay, that they probably still needed to find a striker to help supplement their attack. And part of their thinking when they didn't sign another striker that summer was the fact that because of the World Cup break, actually there's a shorter period of time here to get through. They thought they could maybe muddle through until November in the World Cup break, and then look to make a move in January. So if that thought process was right, then Everton had months and months to draw up a list of strikers that should have been ready to go, even at 12 hours notice. They should have known who was there, what they'd be willing to pay for him, just go through the list because they needed him badly. Like, I think it was luck, not judgment, that kept Everton up that season, really. But anyway, nevertheless, from that, I think probably the most telling thing that Fowler has said from that experience is the fact that, from that he would probably start being more keen to set firm deadlines for business to be done, because obviously otherwise it's the club that suffers as a result of that. So again, I agree with the comments. I think it was
Emery FC who said that.
When you say deadline, what happens on that deadline date if Calvert-Lewin hasn't signed his contract? It's all very well. I know what he's saying, but what happens on that deadline day? Say we get to the 1st of August or whatever, Calvert-Lewin's not signed his contract. What changes on that date?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to factor that in, doesn't it? I mean, when you're setting your deadline, you have to work out what it is that you're aiming for, and part of that will have to be what is more important to the club. As I say, getting any money they can for him, or having him there for next season if they risk losing him for free. And
would that include, like, say, withdrawing the contract offer to him and just saying, like, listen, you either stay to the end of the season or we sell you when this contract is now null and void? Is that one of the things?
I guess it could potentially be. I don't know, but I mean, it'll probably come down to the relationships and where they are at that period of time, wouldn't they? Look, I think that if Dominic Calvert-Lewin was ever minded to sign a new contract, they'd put it down there. So I think they'd want him to do it, and it would protect their asset. If they're not going to end up getting a deal that they want for him this summer, then getting him in on new terms protects him as his value, doesn't it? It means you get him next season, and they can, next season they can have a conversation about selling him for a good fee again. Where I suppose that goes if he doesn't sell it, but there's a lot of dynamics at play.
I know there's lots of stuff we don't know about it, but when he says, there's a deadline working to, it's sometimes it's not as
come back to Newcastle, please come and take him after all.
I think it probably works on a lot. It probably works on everybody operating in good faith, and we know that isn't necessarily always going to be the case in something like this, but that's what it is. You would hope that everybody would be working towards, especially with, as I say, with Calvert-Lewin and with Onana. There are probably scenarios that could unfold whereby everybody ends up being happy. Everton either keep the player or they get enough money for it to be worth having to find the replacement, and Calvert-Lewin gets a move that he might like, and the club get him for a price which is cheaper than they would have to typically pay for someone of that experience and quality because of this contract situation. So. We'll have to wait.
Is he a bit like Onana, do you think, where a few dominoes have got to fall before he would...
quite possibly, because again, we know that, mentioned Newcastle earlier in the context of Onana. I mean, I found the whole Newcastle situation this summer really perplexing, because their mad scramble at the end of the June PSR deadline pointed towards a club that wasn't really acting with any real sense of strategy. Like, I mean, PSR and the potential. Obviously, the rules have been in place since 2013, and Everton have been a warning since last November. So at the very, very worst, they've had. They went into June with 6 months' notice for what the dangers were if they didn't get their act together. And it felt like they went all. I mean, even just talking over a deal for someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin with 10 days to spare. and all of a sudden they got 3 or 4 days out, and it wasn't just an academy player for £10 million that went. They sold £70 million worth of talent and seemingly offered somebody that they're trying to build their future around in Anthony Gordon to another club. It feels like they just went absolutely crazy, and I think that perhaps right now they're struggling to deal with the aftermath of that, because if you've got someone like Gordon and the club might have been prepared to let you go, that messes with their heads as well. What message does that send to him and things like that? So it really confuses me. Like, as I say, if they knew they were going to be that far out, obviously there's a longer game. Just because they sold 60, 70 million pounds worth of talent, they might have only feared being 10 million pound over the limit. But the extra money gives them a lot more to spend this summer, and in this 12 months. But again, and it's nice to have this contrast and Everton be the positive side of this for once. But when Everton started this summer with a problem, and they worked towards what we think could well have been a solution.
In terms of the PSR,
in a way that benefited from the club, aka they sold 2 squad players who were unlikely to be a big part of Dyche's next season, as opposed to selling one of their best player for a cut price fee in Branthwaite to Man United.
Yeah.
And you flip that side and you look at Newcastle, that they panicked so much that they've ended up losing 2 players who that were squad players and youth players again, and they got a lot of money for them. But trying to work out quite where they are right now is interesting.
The other good thing about selling 2 unexpected players last year means if we do make a sale this year, it's for quite a big profit for players that will help our PSR, which, as we all know, is a bit more of a challenge this year than last season. So that's worked big 2 ways. I just find the Calvert-Lewin issue, as you say, that it's not perplexing, but we can't let it drag on, because if he did go, you've then got to get somebody in, haven't you? What you would think.
I don't think it would be quite as desperate scenario as it might be in 12 months ago. I think Beto is someone who I think we're still yet to be able to make a proper judgment on. But I think one of the positives of him signing was the fact that although he's not the same player as Calvert-Lewin, he is someone whose attributes and skill set are similar enough for if Calvert-Lewin isn't available. And we did see this a few times last season. If Calvert-Lewin isn't available, Everton can still set up in the same way and be relatively effective. And I know that there were bad moments from Beto last season, but there were also good performances that he was key to. And when I think of that, I think of him starting the game at Brentford, which was Everton's first league win of the season. Calvert-Lewin came on and got his first goal of the season. That Beto didn't score, but Beto was a big part of creating the nuisance to allow Decore to get the early opener and to help Everton just really come out the blocks firing in that game and have Brentford on the back foot. And I also think again the game away at Nottingham Forest in December, when not again, but in that game, it's easy to remember the big chance that Beto missed. But your alternative takeaway could be that Everton went to a very difficult place in very difficult conditions during a difficult time in the season for them. And without Dominic Calvert-Lewin, they were able to carry on playing to their preferred style and did so in a way in which they were the better side against Forest and they came away with a massive 3 points. And Beto was key to that. And since then, he's had more and more time at Everton to perhaps adapt and develop. And it looks, his end product still looks questionable, but two things that I think are fair to say about Beto from what we've seen so far is, one, even if it's not to the same level, he allows Everton to continue to play along their plan A tactics, which wasn't the case when it was just, say, Mopé in charge and as your backup. And 2, in fairness to Beto, he does tend to make stuff happen. How much of that is on purpose or not? But when I think of his cameos at the end of last season, something always happened. He started against West Ham, didn't he? He got a goal. He missed the penalty, but he had the chance in the first place, didn't he? And he did get the goal in that game. I think about Brighton when he came on with Everton 1-0 up against 10 men for the last 10 minutes, and again he missed the chances, but all of a sudden Everton had an attacking threat, and he did get into good positions. So I don't think there's any. I don't think he's a lost cause or anything like that. And I think that needs to be borne in mind when we discuss the threat of losing Calvert-Lewin, as does, you mentioned it, then the PSR thing as well. And someone like Dominic Calvert-Lewin is so much more of a boost to Everton from that perspective than if they'd sell him for genuine money, as opposed to say someone like Onana.
Yeah.
If Everton sold Onana for £50 million, it mainly just cancels out the Ndiaye deal because they still owe a lot of money for him and there's sell-on clauses and things like that. If Everton were to sell Calvert-Lewin for, if they get 25, 30 million for him, for instance, it's all profit, isn't it? So I mean, it cancels out the Ndiaye deal and then takes you, either closer towards compliance with the rules or, in a best case scenario, giving you more money to spend on strengthening elsewhere.
Just Ian Clark's just said, don't forget, even if Dom didn't score, we played better as a team.
Yeah, I think so.
A couple of quick ones just to finish on Joe, because a lot of people have been asking about the takeover. Somebody says, does the agreement to play Roma in a friendly indicate Freaking will complete the takeover of Everton soon? Well, I did mention in my piece, to be fair, I understand that negotiations over that friendly started before the Freaking period of exclusivity, but is there anything you can mention? Obviously, I don't put you on the spot there, but in terms of the takeover and where we're at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think no news is good news, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we can say, which we haven't been able to say about any of the other deals, perhaps maybe MSP was a bit quieter, is its silence, and hopefully that shows the professionals are at work. So fingers crossed. Look, I mean, there's a lot of due diligence that has to be done and needs to be done, for reasons that we've covered in depth here over the last 2 years. Over the last few years, Everton isn't a club that has been run particularly well in its recent history, and so they will be carrying out a lot of scrutiny and they will want to get reassurances over a lot of things. But at the moment, I think things are still moving forward. Obviously, we know the representatives of the group have visited Merseyside and some of the club's facilities around here, and they've provided some working capital, haven't they? They've paid off the MSP loan as well, so all the indications are good. But I think it has to be a case of cautious optimism. No deal has been done yet. We've been in this period several times with Mashiri already. The group itself is very cautious about where it is right now, and isn't necessarily trying to play things down, but it is a case of, look, there's a process we've got to go through. We're going to go through it properly, and then we'll see where we are. And they're still in that process at the moment.
Yeah, are you heartened by what you've seen, Gav, or heard or not heard, as the case may be in this respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on face value, compared to some of the other parties who've been linked with us in the past, they appear to be, well, they've got a track record in football, which helps. But in terms of the whole business, and I know it's wide ranging and their image and so on, they appear to cover a lot of the bases what you'd want in a prospective owner.
Yeah.
To be fair, and I feel as if they did take us over, and I say it's relatively early days. I think you do think going into Bramley Moor that it takes us into a new era, doesn't it? Really. But Joe made a point before about I was going to mention it at the time, but I thought I'd keep. But the thing about survival. And we've spoken, I think, the last couple of years about going into next season. We just want to survive. 14 to be great and stuff like that. Just keep us in the Premier League. I've got a different feeling for this season. That it's not just about, if you ask me about what to want, just survive. I do because of Bramley Moor and stuff like that. Yeah. But I think, what you're saying about like Dice has only ever known survival and survival fights. Perhaps this season, especially since like last year for all the problems and the 14 games that winning, we effectively got 48 points, which was, I don't know where that would have kept us. There's mid-table, isn't it?
Yeah, level on points with Brighton and 11th.
With an improved squad, that actually survival is not really the objective this year. That actually it's a little bit more than that, and maybe that's been reflected in some of the players that we've been buying, where we're buying players on the upgrade that we can integrate into the team and get them to push on. Does a club and a manager that's just intent on survival buy those type of players? Perhaps you go with like proven players, the type you've signed for a couple of years before. Now you're Ashley Youngs and so on. You look into the future, aren't you? And maybe you're showing confidence in the squad that this is a squad that can kick on next season rather than just end up 16th and just aim for that. And I think that's a really maybe a telling point in terms of what Dyche thinks our prospects are going forward.
That's a really interesting point. It's one of the big questions which will be, I think one of the big questions that hangs over, say, Sean Dyche is he's proven that he can keep this club up in incredibly challenging circumstances. The fight now, we hope that the next question over management isn't who can keep Everton in the Premier League, it's who can manage to transition from a club that's in a relegation fight at the start of every season to a club that's maybe 14th, 15th, that's hoping to get to 10th, 11th, to then get to 8th to 9th, to then get to, and things like that. And it almost might be more pressure on Dyche in that respect. Because the other thing you've got to remember as well is, particularly key with the takeover as well, because obviously fresh eyes coming into the club, is that Dyche's contract ends at the end of this season.
Separate podcast in itself, that isn't it? Really,
and so does Dyche and Farwell's deals both end up at the summer. So there is who do you want from a new owner perspective? If we get that far, who do you want to be the people that are leading you into that transition into the bright new future? And from Farwell and Dyche's perspective, there's the prestige of being that and having to justify yourself to new people in order to do that. So, I think it's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah. Just to finish then, because JG, going back to Onana, says, I think there's a good player in there, but I don't know if it's as an Everton player.
I think that's fair. It feels like, right player, wrong time, almost kind of thing. Yeah,
so taking that on, one player who certainly was an Everton player in more than, obviously he played for Everton. Mandy says, is Richarlison a possibility in this transfer window? Joe, I don't.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it? But I at this stage, I don't think so.
Just the numbers just don't seem to add up for that one, doesn't it?
Tottenham would want a bit too much for anything to happen. I think. I think Tottenham are clearly open to a deal for Richarlison.
Yeah.
And I think, like with a lot of clubs and with a lot of players at the moment, it's seeing what interest comes up, and I think there's a thought process, which is the Saudi clubs might be interested in him. They'll be looking to make back as much of that money that they spent on him in the first place, and I don't think Everton can necessarily help them on that front. But like with all business, by the time we get to the end of the transfer window, there'll be scrambles to get players off books and things like that. There'll be scrambles from clubs that weren't expecting to be in positions to attract certain players to get them. We know he loves Everton. There's no doubt about that. He's a hard-working player. There's no doubt about that either. For someone who come into a Dyche squad, and Dominic Calvert, although he's a different type of player, Dominic Calvert wants to go. Everton would need reinforcements up in that area, but at this stage, I'd be surprised.
Say never go back, Gav. Would you like to see Richie back in Royal Blue jersey?
No, I think that's a very old school Everton type thing to do. And you talk about new eras and stuff like that. It doesn't strike me as a deal that I'd want to do in that in that environment. They still have so much money spares as well, I think, for the deal. And I know that always helps on such moves, but no. If you took away his experiences at Everton and just looked at his stats. I know he had a good run at the end of last season, didn't he, with Spurs over the last 4 seasons. Like, would this be somebody that you want to spend 20, 30 million or whatever? You'd say no and never go back. I think, we can, to progress, I don't think that, as Everton, I don't think that's a move I'd want.
Yeah. Well, AC says just a couple of good blokes talking footy. Just a couple, apparently. There you go.
Define a couple, though.
Yeah. I think that'll do us there. Thank you. I've been your host, Chris Beesley, joined by my colleague Joe Thomas and Gavin Buckland, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.